Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to today's webcast titled Agility in Manufacturing, Shorten Your Lead Times and Reduce Inventory. My name is Santosh and I take care of global campaigns, performance marketing, and demand gen for the operations portfolio here at Aviva, and I will be your host today. Our presenters for today are Marilidia Cloteau, Food and Beverage Marketing Offer Manager from Schneider Electric, and Keith Chambers, Vice President, Operations Execution Software, Aviva. It's my sincere pleasure to be your host today. But before we begin, please take this time to familiarize yourself with the On24 webinar platform as I cover a few housekeeping rules. First of all, please know that all of you are on listen-only mode. At the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets that you can use. All these are resizable and movable. So feel free to move them around to get the most of your real estate on your desktop. The session today will approximately take around 45 to 50 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit them through the Q&A widget found at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Q&A box and then click the submit button. We will try to answer all questions during the webcast, but if a fuller answer needs to be given or needed, or if we run out of time, your questions will be answered via email. Please also know that there are a couple of resources in the resource list. There is a manufacturing operations transformation white paper and a model-driven manufacturing execution system brochure for your use and perusal. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there's no need for a dial-in number. For best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so that you can hear the presenters. Finally, if you have to step away during the webcast or if you miss anything, don't worry, because an on-demand version of the webcast will be available and we will send you the link to access the on-demand version of today's webinar. So without further delay, allow me to hand over the reins to Keith. Keith, please go ahead.
Thank you, Santosh. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Keith Chambers here. Thank you for joining us. But we're going to talk through a number of topics around agility, resilience in both the supply chain and how that really keys into manufacturing. So these are kind of what we'll talk about, a little bit about the new normal, which we all live every day nowadays. A little bit about what that means from a supply chain perspective. This isn't really a supply chain webinar, but it's very relevant because the supply chain really directly impacts the needs for agility and resilience in manufacturing that we'll talk about. And then a very important topic, one that's actually become a little more timely today, with the release of some proposed rules out of the US FDA that Marilidia will talk a little bit about, which is supply chain traceability. Then we'll wrap up with some takeaways and some questions. So I like to start with this slide and this quote from Manuel Faber, who's the CEO of Danone, about the food revolution. A revolution is cooking. What are we going to do about it? We're losing them. They're getting out of our shops, out of our brands. So this was from an interview that he did, I believe, it was 2017, 2018, so pre-COVID interview. And what he was really talking about was what I outlined on the left-hand panel, which is that by 2010, the food and beverage, CPG, fast-moving consumer goods industry had been tremendously successful. 23 of the world's top brands, and they've had an amazing run of 45 years of growing total return to shareholders by 15% a year. They're actually the second most successful industrial segment across that time period. And they really did it based on those kind of 5 pillars that I listed down below. And it was all about scale. It was all about mass market brands. It was all about their relationship with the channel to market, retail, grocery, and that scale and their ability to then shape developing markets. So bring Coca-Cola to Russia, bring Pepsi to Russia, huge opportunities for growth for them, and they use their scale also to drive and expand their businesses even bigger. So you look at companies the scale of Nestle, the scale of Kraft Heinz, even though they've just separated a few assets off of it. These are very large global companies now that have been put together over this time period. And they also got really good at driving costs down and increasing productivity. But all that started to change about 10 years or so ago with this food revolution coming up. And what happened was those 5 pillars for big food now no longer, not only didn't they work, in many cases they became negative. So mass market brand building now suddenly became viewed with suspicion. You didn't go to the store and buy Kraft mac and cheese anymore, as an example. You went to the store and you bought something that looked organic, healthier. There was suspicion about food that was mass-produced. How did they treat the animals that were raised as part of this? How many additives did they put in here? Where did they make this? How far did they ship it? All of these things now started to impact, and these additives started to impact and really undermine the growth of big food with really some very predictable outcomes, right? So there was a tremendous shift of market share from, quote, big food to little food over the last 10 years, probably 2 or 3 market share percentage points. Growth became a big problem for big food companies, and there was a host of kind of competitors that came up as well. And really, when you look at the response of the food, beverage, CPG industries, it was around kind of what I showed here on the infographic on the right. So what they recognized was that their businesses no longer had a single stakeholder. So a business had always been defined as having a single purpose and a single stakeholder, and the purpose was to build shareholder value. The stakeholder was the shareholders. Now food and beverage CPG companies realize that there are multiple stakeholders in their business. There's their customers, their employees, their communities in which they operate, their shareholders. And the definition of value to those different stakeholders is different across those different stakeholders. So there was this fundamental change of thinking that's occurred in the food and beverage CPG industry around aligning with the value that these different stakeholders place on the products that they produce. So this was all kind of pre-COVID, I would say, and very much kind of drove certain behaviors within big food and beverage companies. Huge focus on innovation, bringing new products to market, variety, healthfulness, organic, fat-free, gluten-free, all of the free-from offers that came up. And so that was kind of their path to try and gain back the growth and the profitability that they had enjoyed was through kind of essentially mimicking the smaller companies that were taking their market share. Then, of course, COVID happened, and that ushered in a new normal. So I'm going to play a brief video clip of an interview with CNBC with Mr. Mark Klaus, who's the CEO of Campbell Soup, talking about Campbell Soup's results. This is actually their third quarter results. So it was from a month or two back. That's been happening in the new normal.
You know, as we now move into kind of the next phases and what a new normal might look like, I think we're watching closely, but in the meantime, we're investing heavily into this moment to do the best we can in retaining these households, building relevance, building equity, building usage, all the things we know that will be important in retaining these new consumers going forward. You know, this demand, you know, we're talking about categories that in some cases had been, you know, flat to declining for 10 years. This kind of demand obviously has put a lot of pressure on capacity. So even if demand slows, I would expect us taking the balance of the fourth quarter, even into the first quarter, to fully recover on inventory levels. So
it was just a brief clip. You're welcome to listen to the whole interview. It was actually a very interesting, very interesting interview. But some of the things we talked about and what some of the graphics showed was quite astounding, right? So growth of 140% in some of their core categories that have been kind of flat to declining for many years suddenly boosted up. And this is the the archetypal Campbell soup, right? And suddenly scale and the ability to control and manage their supply chain became critically important, because when you have these huge demand swings, this is what I talk about when I talk about the new normal. When you have these huge demand swings, imagine if you're the guy that's working in a plant making canned soup, and suddenly one day you're told, hey, you need to make 40, 50, 60, 100% more of the products that you normally make. How do you go about that? And that impacts everything. So I kind of listed some of the impacts there. Sourcing. So how do you need to bring new suppliers on board because your existing supply chain maybe has been disrupted. Maybe there's shortage of ingredients. Maybe you need to reformulate some of the recipes that you use to account for variations in ingredients that you didn't need to use before. You're doing all of this at a time where worker safety is a critical concern. You have to socially distance workers more. You have people working remotely, doing functions remotely that maybe typically would be in plant and immediately accessible. You're running additional shifts. You have to do additional cleaning and other procedures on the equipment. And demand, you're seeing demand swing, wild demand swings of products. So some products are now in demand and you can't make enough. Others you don't need to make, so you start to move production from one product to another. All of these things have a tremendous disruption. And when we talk about agility and resilience in the manufacturing plant, this is really what we're talking about. How can a manufacturer start to manage this? And not to say that kind of the immediate kind of the March, April timeframe impacts of COVID are going to be the things that happen every day, but in the downstream of what's happening, these changes are persisting and they're not going to go away for a while. So this really is the new normal that we're living in. So what are some of the challenges? Well, obviously agility is a big challenge. And I put a stat there, over $6.5 billion customer spending has shifted in the food and beverage market in the U.S. from food services to retail just in the last few months, between March and August. And that's kind of represents years of incremental growth that had previously been planned for this move to online shopping by consumers. Suddenly, boom, it just happened in a few months. So that's a whole different channel to market. It has different customer satisfaction criteria. So how do you take these orders? How do you consolidate them? How do you manufacture and get them shipped and keep customers happy and maintain quality and maintain productivity? And you can see some of the other drivers here. We talk about minimizing waste and loss. And again, these were particular kind of early COVID numbers, but in the first few months of COVID, March, April, there was 14 million liters of milk a day were being wasted. And those, from a sustainability perspective, corresponded to 1.6 million tons of CO2 emissions that were being kind of generated, sustaining those cows that produced the milk that ultimately was just getting poured down the drain. So in this context of the new normal, though, manufacturers also need to be safeguarding their quality and food safety and compliance. So recalls, cost of recalls continues, and the scrutiny of both the public, the consumers, and the regulators continues, and in some cases increases. So food safety, an absolute imperative for manufacturers to maintain through the new normal. And productivity, you can see that the numbers there, these don't include COVID, but productivity gains have been falling for food and beverage CPG manufacturers. They've had many years of growth, and then around 2007, 2008, suddenly growth plummeted in productivity from 4.3% down to 0.7%. And this was again being driven by agility and changes that were being made in the supply chain as the velocity of the supply chain, the response to demand accelerated, as the variety, the number of products that were being made increased. It exposed within the plant that many processes that were really being done by operators were being done manually. were now being done far more often than they used to be and presenting far more opportunities for errors than they used to. So productivity fell dramatically over this period. And as we've moved into the new normal, of course, that is even more challenged as you look at experienced workers being sick, having to take entire teams out because someone got sick, bringing in new teams, hiring new workers, et cetera. All of these drive that productivity number. And at the end of the day, once we kind of get through the crisis part of COVID and the new normal, businesses are in business to make money and to serve their stakeholders. So productivity is still a critical factor for businesses and how to remain profitable. So those were the challenges of the new normal. I'd like to kind of walk you through a little bit of a timeline, I guess, a history lesson on supply chains. And this is a very kind of simple picture, a simple set of graphics I'm going to use here. But really before the food revolution, if you were to look at kind of the digital systems, because this is all about digital transformation. If you look at the digital systems that were involved in providing food and beverage into the stores and to the consumers, that was kind of a fairly weak link from the consumer back into manufacturers of food and beverage products, CPG products. There was investment in ERP systems around trying to make those businesses more efficient, and where it was justified, where there were specific point issues, point problems being identified, they would start to introduce manufacturing operations, MES-type systems, into certain plants in their supply chain to address certain issues. Then, of course, the revolution came, and we saw changes in really how food and beverage manufacturers started to invest in their IT systems, in their digital systems. And they were primarily in the supply chain. They were primarily around trying to recognize demand, get closer to the customers, the consumers, try and recognize demand so that they could take action on it in the business. And where they had MES systems, manufacturing operations systems in plants, there was a much tighter loop that was starting to be developed between those plants and the core ERP supply chain systems. And most of the kind of the investment in at this time was around, in supply chain and around how do we get responsive to demand, and so from there, really starting around 2015, the supply chain investments, ERP investments, started to become limited. So you can only do so much virtually. At the end of the day, you need to be able to manufacture and deliver to response, and so the picture changed and started to look more like this, where we're now multi-site MES systems, so plants that could be more fully integrated into the supply chain that could be responsive to demand started to become much more common. And so you saw big food start to roll out multiple sites, trying to make their sites essentially building blocks, no longer black boxes, but more like building blocks as part of their supply chain. And during this part, this is when the drivers around variety and velocity of the supply chain really started to kick in. So how can we take demand and more quickly produce and deliver a response? And also critically, how do we lean out our supply chain, right? So how do we take inventory out, essentially making our manufacturing plants the inventory buffers for our supply chain? And then, of course, in the last year or so, we now have the new normal, and so the new normal has replaced, in a way, variety with resilience. So now suppliers are uncertain and changing. Demand from consumers is still very much closed loop, very much rapid. As I talked about before, the channels to market are changing. More people are being ordering things online, looking for a rapid fulfillment of their orders. And so a new area essentially has become very prominent now in the plants around optimizing production. So how do you operate in this new normal and still make money and still serve your customers. And this is what we're calling production optimization, which is really just looking at in more of a real-time fashion. What is what materials do I have? What's my equipment availability? What are the people that I have working for me and available to make the products that I need to make? And so how can I get visibility to those three areas: materials, people, assets, and really optimize them to produce the most efficient and effective production that I can for the demand that I see. So this is kind of really what the new normal is starting to look at. But there's one other kind of critical part of this that's really becoming increasingly important, and that is kind of consumers are still looking for transparency, and certainly in a time of supply chain disruption, as we're seeing now, supply chain changes, as we're seeing now, understanding where your ingredients came from, the origins, what they're certified as, is more critical than ever. And so you're seeing supply chain traceability, and not just kind of what was the traceability within the plant, but where did the ingredients come from? How did they get to the plant? How did they go from the plant to the retail store? All of that information is now getting put together in this notion of supply chain traceability, which is the second big trend that we see happening in supply chain. So what are the kind of the things that a business needs to do to build resilience and agility within their manufacturing facility? And I kind of listed four there, and there's actually kind of two that are cost related and two that are customer related. So empowering employees and optimizing operations are critical. So for companies to thrive in the new normal, they need to really move from having employees that are just there to perform work to employees that are almost kind of integrated into the information flow. As this digital transformation sweeps into the industry to try and provide or support the resilience and the agility needed, workers are absolutely key for that, and workers are now expected to be much more connected, much more flexible, and really much higher value add. So they're looking to regain some of the productivity that's been lost over the last few years. Optimal operations. So talked about this with production schedule optimization. Absolutely critical that production is as optimized as possible within the boundaries of safety, quality, et cetera, and productivity to make sure that you can be as responsive as possible. Then there's the customer-facing sides of it, right? The engagement with customers, being confident that the product is safe, secure, is actually authentic, that it's not a counterfeit, it wasn't stolen and repackaged and resold, and being able to bring the right offers to market. So again, the Campbell Soup example I gave is a great example of a company kind of refocusing their portfolio around demand. And so offerings now need to be demand-driven. We need supply chains, manufacturers need supply chains that can support those demand increases. So the technologies to achieve those four, I call them digital imperatives. The infographic on the right there is Industry 4.0. So Industry 4.0 is kind of a technology approach that was developed in Germany originally to support competitive advantage for German manufacturers. It's now become kind of a de facto standard, but it really does detail out kind of at least the technical part of a digital transformation journey. And this graphic on the right here is the reference architecture that they provide as part of that. And I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but I just want to draw really kind of three critical technologies out of an Industry 4.0 approach to digitalization, agility, and resilience. So the first is the digital twin, which is kind of the underlying virtualization or digitalization of your production processes and assets. The second, I talked about this a little bit as well, is the connected workers. So workers are no longer kind of serving the machines, if you will. The workers are now connected and are part of the system. They're no longer kind of an outside piece that does manual things. They're fully integrated into the production processes. And connecting these two things, the digital twin and the connected worker, is this notion of operational intelligence. So taking the tremendous amount of data that comes from digital twin and from the connected worker, and really applying that in ways that we haven't been able to before. We've had manufacturing intelligence for a long time, reports, dashboards, et cetera. Operational intelligence really now starts to apply AI concepts, machine learning concepts to better support the optimization that has to happen within a plant. So just to expand a little on these thoughts, so digital twin, like I said, it's the virtualization of the manufacturing processes and assets. There's actually three aspects to it. There's a kind of the engineering side of the digital twin, the asset performance or maintenance side of the digital twin, and the operations side. So we'll mostly talk about operations here, since we're kind of focused on resilience and agility for production. And on the operations side of the digital twin, this essentially provides the context, all of the context around and data sets around optimizing what's going to happen, what needs to happen in the plant. So there's a number you can see in that kind of blue set of apps that I showed there. These are just some of the applications that people run within their plants, but they all need to kind of work off of this common model, if you will, which is the digital twin for operations. And that model needs to be connected to the automation systems, to the IIoT, to business systems, and increasingly into the corporate data lakes that are being built up now. And this digital twin needs to be cloud and edge enabled. So it needs to be kind of manageable. The right pieces of it need to be in the cloud. The right pieces of it need to be on premise. It needs to bring analytics and AI. It needs to bring mobility to the users and social interaction to the users. So that's the digital twin. It's all around process mastery of the processes that are happening to manufacture. Then there's the workers, the connected worker. And I really pulled out three main areas of connected worker to talk a little bit about. So workers today need to be mobile. So the idea that the workers are going to sit in the control room, see what needs to be done, go out, do it, come back, and then document what they did. Those days are kind of largely parked as A, it's very inefficient, B, it's very error prone. So mobility moves work to the place where it's actually being done, and it supports the work with actionable data. It also facilitates collaboration, so being able to share knowledge. So in the new normal, not all of the workers are in the plant like they used to be. You can't always just kind of call up the plant manager who may be kind of walking the line in another part of the operation and have them come over and look at your issue. So there needs to be collaboration capabilities and integration of remote workers, remote SMEs into the skill set that the worker has. And then finally, tools like extended reality that, as we've seen increasingly, kind of new workers being brought in to cope with demand, increased turnover as kind of some workers look for work in alternate areas, so particularly in some of the subsegments like meat packing, for instance. They've had a very high turnover rate in some areas. But as new workers come in and need to learn new skills, extended reality can really accelerate their mastery of those skills. And then finally, operational intelligence. Operational intelligence is really around bringing the information together. And we've used the term actionable information for a long time, but really actionable information now is kind of meaning more what it says. So analytics that are not just kind of advisory and leaving it up to the worker to decide what to do, but are now predictive. So they're telling, hey, you need to do something about this, or this is going to happen. So predictive asset reliability, predictive quality, for instance. And then analytics, operational intelligence becoming increasingly prescriptive. What is the correct set point? So center lining is a great example of prescriptive analytics, where AI tools, machine learning, can actually advise the worker now what are the best settings for this machine, for this day, for these products that we're making. And that brings me to traceability. So traceability has always been, long been a part of what's been done within the digital systems within a plant. And really, the diagrams on the right-hand side there are what we call Sankey diagrams. So they kind of show traceability. In this particular case, the blue boxes are the manufacturing assets, and the gray kind of swirly bits are the flow of different lots or different traceable products through those to produce particular products. So we've always done traceability within the plant, but really traceability now is becoming a supply chain issue. So the FDA has just released today, very timely actually, just released today the proposed rules, part of the Food Safety Modernization Act for food traceability, that really talk about and will require manufacturers in the U.S. To provide full supply chain traceability, critical event tracking, not just within the plant, but within the supply chain. So where the food is created, how it moves to the plant, what happens in the plant, and then how it gets moved to the consumers. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mary-Lydia, who will talk a little bit more about food safety traceability across the supply chain. So
thank you very much. Yeah, very much, Keith. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Keith. Yes, why we are talking about this topic, why now? As Keith just mentioned, and I will start this way because this is really a tremendous news that has been released. The food safety has been changing and accelerate also through regulation. So and with the current situation that we are facing. So for example, during some of the lockdown periods that we all were facing around the globe, the European regulation has taken some statement on the farm to fork strategy as part of their Green Deal. It was in May 2020. FDA just released some hours ago a new traceability rule as part of the Food Safety Modernization Act. So we have been able to see that this new normal pushed the regulation into more traceability and regulation around it to bring more food safety to the consumers. To be for sure putting some pressure on the industry. But not only food safety, we have been able to see more and more traceability linked to sustainability. As Keith just mentioned, we have seen the imperative of transparency and more product information needed for consumers. Consumers during this pandemic, they have been tracking and checking the information and from where the products were coming from, where they were manufactured, where raw materials and the ingredients were coming from. And we tend to see also a kind of localization. They want to consume also local products because they also tend to become more responsible consumers. So traceability is now linking to sustainability and involving the entire supply chain, because this is also working with the ecosystem, not only as a manufacturer, but also integrating the upstream, your suppliers, your farmers, the raw materials producer, also working fairly and trading fairly with them as well. And not only, also including more and more animal welfare, etc. So this is going very, very far. And finally, we have seen all the smartphone apps accelerating. They are the new advisor for consumers. And I really challenge all of you. We are all consumers. I'm pretty sure that we are using some of those apps. I personally, I use a lot of them because we are seeking more and more information. We want to ensure that the products we are buying are safe. This was, I would say, by the past, but we want to ensure. Again, we want more information. If the farmer has been well treated, if the raw material is not using children at the farm level. So again, brands has been exposed to this kind of statement as well. So because consumers are putting pressure on them. So this is this new reality asking for more traceability, not only at plant level, but on the supply chain. So what is supply chain traceability, in fact? So supply chain traceability, this is really starting as a prerequisite which if you don't master in this journey your plant traceability at batch level, this might be difficult to build the entire traceability end-to-end or the traceability. So this is really linking all the necessary information that Keith just mentioned before, all the upstream information, the certificates, and the number of lots, the location of the raw materials into the plant information for your production at batch level, and also including information as calibration of the most critical devices on your lines, but also making sure that your cleaning equipment have been done efficiently and effectively as well. And then after, making sure that you transfer part of the information that you want, that you choose to disclose to your dream supply chain. It can be the retailers, the distributor, the e-commerce, and your end consumers through different applications. We envision then also that regulation might be challenging you, and also asking directly through those digital platforms or digital solution to send in real time this information as well. So again, everything is pushed by the consumers. Regulation now is also, it's not only about product recalls, but it involves much more. And also, it's not only about food safety, but going beyond. So what is at the end-to-end traceability? This is really the ability to identify, collect, and verify the that are siloed at different stages of your entire food chain, from the raw materials up to your point of sales. So this is really getting more visibility in suppliers, mapping them, ranking from your rank 1, that is mandatory today, but until your rank N. So that means as far as you can, we can collect the information that are critical, such as origin of ingredients, checking the certificates compliance, to just check who are your suppliers that can be at risk. And also, who are the one providing the most critical raw materials that might be at risk in your supply chain in case of any shortage or in case of this pandemic, where the raw material might come from all over the seas and cannot be shipped on time. This is what happened during the pandemic. This is also end-to-end traceability, about the ability to track and trace each item when they move from the manufacturing plant along the downstream supply chain at the granularity level that it requires. So that means at pallet, at carton, but at item level, if this is needed, because this is a way also to better manage product recall and also have visibility into your inventory. That will enable you to gain more transparency along your value chain, providing more visibility on this information. This is good for your operational efficiency, but this is then also an information that you can decide to disclose to your stakeholders or your ecosystem, including your end consumer. This is fundamental, essential for food investigation. We have been seeing regulation moving into this direction. This is crucial for the food across the planet as well, and to recover trust of end consumers that might have been disappointed by this lack of information and transparency. And this is mandatory to build really an agile, credible, and sustainable supply chain, and also to differentiate your brand. So again, to simplify, this is the goal. This is to collect the critical data at different stages of your value chain. With the plant, Keith mentioned that. Let's start with the plant. Also integrating data from the upstream. It can be data about quality of the raw material, certificate whatsoever, and then also collecting data downstream supply chain, concentrating, aggregating all those data into what we call a data lake, a data hub. So you have the different sources of the data, and then upon this pool of data, you can build your intelligence. You can build application, operational tools that will give you more information about the status of a product recall, or that might give you more information about who are the suppliers at risk, who are the ones that are best performing? Can you change maybe the suppliers so then you can shorten your supply chain and don't put some ingredients that are really critical at risk, or localize them? So this is really a way to capture more intelligence to gain more efficiency, and then also provide this information upon your strategy to the end consumer. So this, in a way, in a sense, this is trying to build the digital passport of your product. So that means that having all the unique identity of your product, and also recording all the different events that are critical when your products are moving along the journey. Or what we see, this is really trying to reconcile all the physical flow of product with the digital flow of data. This is also what it is all about. So how do we do that? We do that by choosing modular and scalable solution based on where we are in this journey, where you are also regarding digital transformation, because the end-to-end traceability, this is the business case of the digital transformation. So it also starts with your business priority. It's never starting with the technology. Technology is serving a business case, in fact. So you have to start very small, try and test, and think by building something that is scalable, but also modular, depending on the different plant needs that you can have in your company. You also have to remain, because we know this is not something that you will be building alone. You can build also by answering and integrating something that exists. We generally comply very much with the GS1 standard that are pretty much used in the food and beverage industry, for example. And also you have to think global. So that means that cybersecurity issues will be key when you select some partners, some solution as well. And again, this is all about selecting the right partners able to supply the technology, and the right partners also able to support you into this global implementation when you will be doing the rollout of the solution. And then also don't think about only what is happening today. The journey is just starting. We are learning from this journey. So we have to also welcome flexible solutions that will evolve in the future as well. Because again, that end-to-end traceability is at the convergence of the IT and OT world, but we don't know what will be the requirements tomorrow. So again, is to think this way. So to conclude on why starting this end-to-end traceability, the benefits that you can have out of it, again, aside of the way that it is really one way for you to build agility in your supply chain, this is really to recover the full control of the value chain from your raw material up to the point of sales. This is really a journey to start building a credible and sustainable supply chain. It's a powerful solution to fight counterfeiting. Some might be really targeted. I am thinking about the spirits one, for example, infant formula. We have several examples in mind. This is a fantastic recall capability. It can speed up product recall because you are gaining more visibility into your entire supply chain. That is also the way you interact with your retailers and your partners, and also at the warehouse stages as well. This is also a tool that will help you also getting more visibility into your suppliers, map them, try to mitigate the supplier risk, and also check what can be the reputational damage out of one supplier, for example. This is again pushed by regulation, now more and more a reality with this FDA new traceability rule just released. This is really a way for you to compliance and also gain put more sustainability at the heart of your operation, and really you are prepared for the evolving regulation. But not only, we are talking about consumer. This is a way for you to build your brand loyalty, to interact in a manner with your consumer. And for sure, at the end, ultimately, to increase sales and assure consumer trust. So I will say, from one side, this is a way for you to build resilience, to act upon your operational excellence, apply to the entire supply chain, and also a new way to engage with your consumer and differentiate your brands. So I hand over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Mary-Olivia. So we're just going to do a quick wrap up and talk a little bit about kind of next steps and thoughts in this topic, and then we'll move to Q&A. So really just, and this has been the theme of the whole webinar, is that resilience and agility in manufacturing are the new imperatives. What have we learned over the last few months? So firstly, food and beverage is an essential industry. We all need to eat and drink. It's not an option. We've seen supply chain disruption, supply chain risk is a number one concern for food companies. So you simply can't produce foods and satisfy demand without a functioning supply chain, and some of those supply chains got fairly severely disrupted. We've seen some changes in the macro drivers for food and beverage manufacturers. So it used to be around reducing inventory and increasing variety. That was kind of the big focus for big food, and now that's changed. So the focus is really around, you can almost say, customer service. So keeping the shelves stocked, making sure that you're able to respond appropriately for online orders. Moving production from food service items and packaging to home consumption. So this was a big change for a lot of companies. Was for the first time, actually March of 2020 was the first time that spending in the U.S. on food services, i.e. eating out, exceeded for the first time ever the amount of money that's spent on food for eating at home. Of course, in April, those numbers became completely different, and so there's been this change in focus on what do we need to get out of our supply chain and manufacturing facilities. There's been significant bottlenecks have been exposed, and companies not only have to deal with those disruptions, but they also need to act to ensure worker safety, to make sure that their ecosystem and their suppliers are also doing well, because the sort of thing that takes a village, and it really does take a supply chain to feed people. And so there's a few kind of little stats that I put at the bottom there. 94% of companies are seeing supply chain disruption. I guess that's no surprise. Huge increases in online grocery shopping. Like I said, this has been years worth of projected growth. The sort of growth that they've seen was projected to take years. It's happened almost overnight. But consumers continue to look for healthful, safe, sustainable choices for the food that they buy from the choices that they have. So a few takeaways. Firstly, digital transformation is a journey. So that infographic on the left is one that I like to use to talk about the journey of a digital transformation for agility and resilience. So the 4 S's. So you start with a strategy, and then you just start. Start small, validate solutions, fail fast. For the solutions that are successful, bring value and help, then they need to be scaled across the organization, and then they need to be sustained. Otherwise, without sustaining these solutions, the gains that you might make will be very temporary. So that's really the digital transformation journey that's been pretty well understood now, I think, across all industries, and is very much playing out now in food and beverage and CPG. Other takeaways around agility and resilience. So plants must be matched with their supply chain systems to achieve this agility and velocity. So these aren't the same things. If you're a supply chain person and you talk about agility and resilience, you're talking about kind of alternate suppliers. You're talking about lead times for ingredients. You're talking about kind of multi-site planning across multiple manufacturing assets. When you're in the plant, agility means being able to deal with the outcome of all of that. In other words, being able to move production from a demand perspective, being able to introduce new and safer ways of working to protect your workers, being able to properly and safely introduce new suppliers and ingredients and formulations into the products that we make. So these two kind of what used to be quite separate things need to be well integrated together to be successful. Second takeaway, changing the way of working and the operating rhythms within the plant is no longer optional. You can't continue to run your plants the way they were running pre-COVID. Nowhere clearer than say the meatpacking industry, just as an extreme example. Operational intelligence, so the use of technology and tools not to replace workers, but to make them better, provide insights that allow them to optimize production, support improvements, safeguard quality, and ensure reliable operation of the assets. And then finally, supply chain traceability is there to improve engagement with customers, safeguarding food safety, and increasingly a regulatory requirement. So with that, we'll kind of wrap up the slide part of the webinar, and we'll move to Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Keith and Maria, for an excellent presentation. We are now ready to begin our Q&A session. I'd like to remind the audience to type your questions into the question box, and we will answer each question in the order it was received. I will now hand over the reins to Michael, my colleague, who will kick off the Q&A session. Michael?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Okay. There was a question in the beginning, maybe it's good to start with, is does the resilience relate only to the supply chain and the agility only to the manufacturing side of things?
Yes, I can take that. I think I touched on that a little bit on the takeaway slides. So they're really kind of, they go together. And the reason that we use those two terms together is that in a sense it's all agility, but the driver of why you need agility has fundamentally changed in both supply chain and in the manufacturing operations. So whereas agility kind of last year really meant variety, velocity, new products, those kinds of things. Agility now in the new normal means adaptability, being able to accept different ingredients, different suppliers, being able to rapidly incorporate new work processes, being able to move production or increase production on certain lines. So maybe convert lines that were typically producing food service packaged items and converting them to produce home consumption packaged items. So those are the kinds of things, kind of changes that have made. And like I said, it really gives a new focus to what we mean by agility, both in the supply chain and in manufacturing. And of course, we're very manufacturing centric here in Aviva for the food and beverage CPG industries. So very much kind of the terms apply to both, I guess, to answer the question. And we put the words together to really highlight the change in meaning. So the new normal, agility in the new normal is not agility as we thought about it a year or so back.
Right. And another question here is, do we have any tools or strategies to track the raw materials from source and have it constantly linked to the final product at present?
I can take the point if you like, Keith.
Yes, please do, Mary.
Okay. So yes, indeed, we are seeing new tools appearing. So based on software solution or cloud platforms, linked with also IIoT that can really send and manage dynamic data, what we call a release, such as, for example, the quality of raw materials, not only static data as, for example, certificates or survey that you can handle with your suppliers. So by combining together these tools and linking them with the tool that you use in the plant. So here I am entering the word of the traceability and the plant, and we'll be talking about genealogy. So yes, this is a way for you to track your raw materials from the source and directly linking to the final product that you will be manufacturing at the plant. And then you import data and you continue along your supply chain, and then you have your entire product life cycle that might be covered. So this is a journey starting. So this is a bunch of new solution that you integrate all together, and that will enable you to do, because a lot of people are talking about blockchain, but the point of blockchain, this is relevant if you want to share some critical data with your entire ecosystem by forcing some trust. But at the end, you need to capture the data and you need to implement some tools to capture them, concentrate them into one single place, and then after you can share to your ecosystem. I don't know if you want to add something upon this, Keith.
Yeah, just to amplify something that you were talking about earlier, there are several pieces to doing supply chain traceability. So there's collecting data at the source. So sources, origin data, certificates. So, is this fair trade? What was the certificate that the farmer has to say that it's fair trade, making sure that all of that is captured, linked to the system. Traceability within the plants, serialization, which is till now has been thought about more in the life science industry, but being able to trace individual retail packaging back to its production history is a part of this as well. And as Maria said, it's very important to bring all this in together in context, so that a consumer or a tax collector or a producer can actually pass through the data. So there's also this tremendous need for managing product information as well.
Okay. There's a related question, maybe from a technicality point of view. Are there specific plant to enterprise integration needs for the supply chain integration and traceability, and are they different from ERP integration people practice today?
Yeah, so I'll take that. So yes, some of the basic information is going to be the same. So you'll still have kind of material masters, lot information, quality plans, those kinds of things. Where they come to is a little different. So we're seeing kind of a big swing back in the market from a few years ago, where all of the investments were being made directly into ERP systems, and ERP systems were expected to do the supply chain, sales and operations planning. We're seeing that kind of change a little now. There's a lot more kind of specialty companies that specifically deal with supply chain demand planning, scheduling. And so while the integration needs maybe haven't changed, maybe they've been expanded upon, and there are other systems that are being involved now. So that we no longer would expect to just get a list of orders to execute in a day from the ERP system. We would expect maybe to get a schedule down from a supply chain planning system that was highlighting the revenue opportunities for the plant. That we would expect to be able to reply back to that with kind of the current optimization plan to go execute that. So the basic integration points are the same. Maybe some of the systems they touch on are different now.
Okay. Another question here is a bit more general. Where do I start with this traceability and agility approach? At the plant level or at the supply chain?
Yeah, so I'll start this and then hand over maybe Marilee, you can close it. So from my perspective, absolutely kind of starts in the plant, and unless we can connect ingredients to finished goods accurately, then kind of origin certificate data doesn't mean a whole lot. And there are certain kind of regulations that are already in place around traceability within the plant. It's kind of a fundamental for food safety as well that you're able to do that. So I guess that would be my answer, but I'd hand over to Mara-Lydia for your thought.
I can only say that I agree with you, and this is all the time when we are managing such kind of project. This is what we see. This is the foundational first step. This is really where it starts again. And I touched this point during the presentation. If you don't master your traceability at the plant level, at the batch level, then this might be very difficult for you to move forward. So then this is just linking the different pieces all together. So that means that you have your manufactured goods with all the recipes, the raw material, your best practices, your equipment that you need to manage. And then after, you will be able to connect more information coming from your suppliers and from the raw materials per se, even dynamically or in a static mode. And then after, also providing more information to your downstream supply chain, as Keith mentioned previously, all the info related to the product itself, so the product data that you send to the retailer. So this is really the foundation. This is where it starts. So the plant traceability and connecting the dots with the upstream and the downstream according to your business priorities, I would say.
Okay, as we reach the top of the hour, I turn it back to Santosh to wrap up.
Great, thanks, Michael. We hope you found the presentation informative, and I ask that you share your feedback by taking a short survey found in the survey widget at the bottom of the screen. Your feedback is very important as it helps us improve our programs. We are now concluding the webinar, but again, I'd like to reiterate that we have a few useful resources in the resource list widget that is available at the bottom of your screen. We hope that everyone is safe and doing well amidst everything that we are living with this global pandemic. The recording of today's session will be available in the next few hours. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all for attending and have a great rest of day. You may now disconnect.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.